Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. My name is Jasper Dent, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers here in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory. This is the land of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis Nation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of In Velvet by Dr. Jerry Haigh, with guest host David Carpenter joining us tonight. Thank you so much to both Jerry and David for being here and for working with us at McNally to make this event happen. Can everyone hear me all right in the back with the microphone here? Is the volume okay? It's a little low. I'm going to turn it up. All right, how's that?
Very good.
Perfect. Okay, so this event is being live streamed. There's a web camera just up to your right, my left up here. I'd also like to take this moment to remind you all to please silence or turn off your cell phones. We're going to have a book signing after the event here. And if you'd like to buy a copy of In Velvet, we have some up here on the signing table or on the desk by where you first walked in. And you're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it. We just ask that you please remember to stop by the cash desk afterwards. Desk in the middle of the store, you can pay there. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce your guest host for the evening. David Carpenter is the author of 15 books of fiction and nonfiction and 1 book of poetry so far. His literary awards and honors include the Saskatchewan Book Awards 2010 Book of the Year, the Kloppenburg Prize for Literary Excellence, the Burt Award, and the High Plains Creative Nonfiction Award. He lives and writes in Saskatoon, and he's here to introduce Jerry to say a few words about him and the book. Everyone, please welcome David Carpenter.
Thank you very much, Jasper. I think I'll stand unless I fall. It's a great pleasure to be introducing such an amazing creative force of nature this evening. I don't know it. I don't know if you know it, but his CV is 561 pages long. I can only imagine when he came to Saskatoon to have an interview for his position as a wildlife vet on campus. They would see on his CV right away that he's quite familiar with elephants, rhinos, lions, polar bears, moose, and bison, and that's just a shortened list. He's very good at immobilizing, inseminating, and feeding deer. He's a great storyteller, and if you can get hold of him, ask him to talk about the rutting of elks. He has a lot to say. He knows that if he finds a fawn that has an ulcer, well, darn it, my list is so long, I'm going to take up all the time. One thing I noticed, though, that how it qualifies him as a kind of archetype of our time. He once transported 24 elk to New Zealand in the DC-3, and they threw in some cows and horses as well, and they even on the way of fitting Jo, his wife, in the plane. And I think that qualifies him as the Noah archetype of our thing. So with no further ado, get up here and break their hearts, Jerry.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm not sure I need a microphone. I can usually project my voice fairly well. So, dog at the back, can you hear me, or do we need the microphone?
Mike.
Mike. Okay, the mic it is. I'll bring it a little closer. Okay, well, super to see everybody here. Spencer, good evening, old friends, fellow authors, other folks I haven't met. It's great. Thank you, Dave, for those kind words. You didn't perjure yourself completely, at least. And especially for Jo. She features, can we turn that light down a bit so folks might be able to see a bit? Thank you. There are 4 reasons for starting with a picture of Jo. First of all, she's in the very first page of the very first chapter of the book and read every single word of my horrific typing. Very often I had no idea what I've typed because I was brought up in the days when boys were taught shop and sports and girls were taught typing and, you know, home ec and all the rest of that stuff. So I've never learned to type properly. Secondly, it's her birthday today, June the 26th. I'm not allowed to tell you how old she is because you must never ask a woman how old she is, what her original hair color was, and most importantly, you must never say, you used to look beautiful in that dress, dear. Okay. Now, I'll get to the third reason in a minute, but I'll just tell you that she was very instrumental in me getting the job in Saskatoon, and I'll show you why in a minute. But there's one more key. June the 26th, 57 years ago, she said yes. And here we are. So that's 57 years to the day. Well, a telephone call from Dean Nielsen at the veterinary school came in, offering me a job as a wildlife veterinarian in Saskatoon at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine to Nanyuki in Kenya, where we could see Mount Kenya from my bedroom window. I wasn't there. I was in Rwanda on an elephant project, removing elephants and rescuing people who were suffering terribly. The elephants were killing people, destroying their crops, destroying their homes. And it was necessary for us to do a translocation and get them out of there. This was Rwanda. And so in a little tiny post office in Kigali at the weekend, I composed a cable. Now, a lot of you are old enough to remember what a cable was. It was a piece of yellow paper that you wrote with your pen and you had no punctuation. You had to write the word stop. Some of you don't know what the hell I'm talking about because you use message apps these days, but that was the app of the day. And there's the cable that I wrote. Understand, job offer Saskatoon, stop. On safari Rwanda, translocating elephants, stop. We'll make contact ASAP on return to Kenya, stop. So when I got home, after sending that cable, I arrived at the zoo. And lo and behold, I met species I'd never even seen before. There were elk, which is, of course, part of this story for sure. But there were Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. There were guanacos from South America. I had no idea, ever seen one of them. And when I arrived in May, the bull elk at the zoo was beautiful, pale-coated, velvet antlers just growing, starting to grow, and just chilled out, no trouble at all. But I couldn't come straight away because our son Charles was due in early July. So it wasn't going to be a good move to Saskatoon when the baby was on the way, which is supposed to be July the 1st. So I came back to start work in September, and that bull elk didn't look quite the same as he did when he was there. He was fuming, to say the least of it, violent, chasing his females, and Dave referred to something about the fact that I had close encounters with an elk. Well, this particular elk came over to the fence, challenged me, and proceeded to piss on his belly, on his throat, on the black hairs on his throat. And some of that stuff came through the wire onto my coveralls, and it stank. It was revolting. And I didn't know why, because it wasn't the smell of urine. And it took me 5 years to finally find out in a research program to which I'm not referring tonight, where I studied reproductive seasonality of elk. and it's a special gland. But after carrying on like that, he then engaged in something called flamen, which is a very boring term, a German word, for what in 1576, author George Turberville wrote his book, The Noble Art of Venereal Hunting. And he wrote a much more lyrical response, description. For when they smell the hind, they raise up their nose up into the air and look aloft as though they gave thanks to nature, which gave them so great delight. So it's a smell thing. He's checking the females out to see who's ready to stand still for his attention. And it wasn't just animals. That flamen response occurs in lots of animals. Napoleon put it slightly differently. When he wrote to Josephine coming back from Moscow, I will return in 3 days. Don't wash. Okay, so different ways of viewing about, and it's a very good thing that flamen doesn't occur in humans. Just imagine men in a setting like this or a sports event. Could be awkward. Anyway, there is Turberville's, one of his lovely books, illustration of breeding. And the perspective of you will have noticed that actually there's not likely to be very much breeding in this particular case, because of, obviously in 1576, people were just as prudish as the Victorians were when they put skirts on piano legs. However, he has a wonderful description of what they got up to. Now, at the zoo, a couple of things happened. First of all, suddenly out of nowhere, we found an elk on 3 legs. He'd broken his toe, and I don't know how, we never found out, but you could see the bone there in that picture. And he was dead lame. We had to do something about it. So Dave referred to immobilization, which of course we did, and I bandaged it. Came back the next day with the x-ray machine from the college, supposed to be portable, but it worked. And we've ended up treating him by putting this very, very fast drying epoxy on the toe. And like fingernails, cows, elk feet grow steadily. And in about 5 weeks, the epoxy that fell off with the little shoe we put, and he was fine and dandy. Well, in the middle of all that, I suddenly got this phone call from the Calgary Zoo. Dr. Bim Hoff, will you please come and help me? He didn't use the word asshole, but that's what he meant. Was shot our bull elk with a crossbow in the zoo. And so they hadn't got a bull elk. And he asked me, because he had a new drug that he'd never used and didn't know much about, would I please come and help him with it? Well, I'd had experience in Africa, as Dave referred to, with lots of different species. So yes, I went over, and here we are. We found this elk in Banff National Park. The zoo director had allowed the capture of a bull elk in Banff National Park. And we took it, we immobilized it. You can see it's getting groggy now. And we were set to, we took it back to the zoo. And you can see the other thing about him, which is interesting. He only has 5 spikes, 5 tines, as they're called, on the antlers. And that's a 2-year-old, which is very good news. Somebody chose the right animal. Well, antlers. Dave referred to antlers, so I'm obliged to read a little bit. So here we go. From chapter 4, Astonishing Antlers. Delving into the history of antlers proved to be one of the most interesting adventures I have ever taken. It took me from The Noble Art of Venereal Hunting, published in 1576 by the celebrated poet George Turberville, through many research papers from New Zealand, Europe, the USA, and Canada, to Dr. John Fletcher's important book with its straightforward title, Deer. Of the some 5,500 species of mammal on Earth, only 41, 0.7%, deer carry antlers. And all but one, the reindeer, caribou, they're only seen in males. Like some trees, they lose their leaves every year. Antlers are deciduous. In some species from temperate or subpolar regions, they grow annually, remain hard for some months, are cast and regenerate. The remarkable development, the new growth, is summed up by Fletcher. It is the only organ among mammals that completely regenerates in all its complexity of skin, hair, sweat glands, nerves, blood vessels, cartilage, bone, and so on. It is no surprise to realize this unique attribute has humans thinking about the process. John goes on to write, if we could understand in depth how the growing antler differentiates all these cells, we might be some way toward enabling humans and other species to regenerate damaged spinal cord or grow new limbs. Unlike the horns of cattle that last for the life of the animals, antlers grow from pedicles, permanent structures between the ears. To describe the annual cycle that occurs in colder regions, it seems logical to start with the most recognizable period when hard antlers are on the animal's head. And the next 2 pages have illustrations of the whole process, starting from hard antler, going through the casting, regrowing the whole thing. There's a whole series of photos, including, just for the fun of it, one of Tocqueville's pictures. I couldn't resist. Well, it wasn't just that was antler-wise, because in 1980 in Prince Albert, I met an amazing man called Tony Bubenik. He was known as the walking encyclopedia of deer. He had over 250 articles, 6 books. He was a phenomenal artist. This is his drawing from a Super 8 movie that I've seen. He spoke 7 languages. And in 1971, he came to Ontario and joined the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources. And what's up? What's going on? Oh, don't tell me what's happened.
It's all right. It's just turning back on.
Okay. Where are we now? Oh, what's going on? This is a bit of a nightmare.
No, that was my fault. I thought you were done.
Oh, Lord. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Well, you know what we're going to do? Well, I'll tell you a bit more about Tony. You'll see the picture in a minute if Jasper gets it fixed. First thing, he was a refugee from Poland and then the Czech Republic, the Nazis and so on. In Yugoslavia, he studied red deer antlers and red deer and developed a dummy. Should be up there. That should be it. There we are. There he is, his drawing of a red deer that he put on a dummy set on his shoulders and antlers and made a friendly encounter. And the red deer accepted him as a deer. Well, he then proceeded to do something very interesting. He built a big corral with enormous high walls and one big gate. And the deer came into the feeding troughs he put in there. They got very used. These are wild deer. They got quite used to it. And eventually, when they hardened the antlers in the fall, he started to reduce the size of the gate that they'd been able to walk through very easily, no problem at all. And 2 centimeters every now and again. And it came to the point when the deer could walk through no problem. And then one day they realized they couldn't. So they did what you and I, all of us probably at some point have done, moving furniture in the house. We twisted it round the corner and they came in. And then 2 more centimeters, bang. They knew their antler size precisely. They knew they could not get in. Done and dusted. They could not get in. They absolutely knew it. So he then moved to Canada in 1981 and turned the study from red deer to moose in Ontario. And he built 3 sets of antlers based on the size of the on the dummy head that you see there. One were monsters, 9 feet wide. And then he built 2 others, little tiny ones from a yearling, about big as my hand, and another set that will create an interesting moment in a moment, because it was the same size as the bull in the clearing, bull moose he had found. So he put on the tiny ones, and he walked out into the clearing, and the bull moose went on feeding, not interested. Tony, of course, was not stupid. He walked sideways. Then he put the big ones on, seriously big. And the bull moose lifted its head, and vanished into the trees. He knew he wasn't going to mess with that baby. And then he did something which is one of those don't do this at home sort of things. He put on the same size antlers, and the whole scene changed. Moose, when they get aggressive, rock their heads from side to side to show those enormous palms and up and down. And lo and behold, what do you think came round the pond, doing his thing. There's Tony standing there. Mary Tony's wife, also a biologist, was filming this. And as the moose got closer, her filming technique began to deteriorate. And then he shot the dummy, very wise, and the moose took off. He took the experiment further, but extraordinary. He put on the big set and he encountered a moose, cow, and bull. She left her consort and came over to him to offer herself for mating. So something we all know, of course, size matters. Now, the other thing at the zoo in the fall was the death of the white-tailed deer buck. Suddenly we didn't have a buck. Brent Pendleton, the zoo head keeper, and I went searching through other zoos to see if we could find a deer. We didn't. So what to do? Well, my colleague, Dr. Ruben Mapletoft, had a team of scientists, graduate students, studying how to set up synchronization of estrus so as you could breed a specific number of hours with artificial insemination after the last injection. No information on what to do with deer, but I did have a client up at Osler who had white-tailed deer buck. I didn't ask where he got his license, that wasn't my business. And he allowed me to collect semen from that buck. I'd learned that in that research program that I told you about. We're not going any further into that. So I set up the two does in the pen with the right injections on the right hours and the right hours after the last injection, bingo. We inseminated both of them. And in the spring, lo and behold, 4 little fawns. There was no information anywhere on artificial insemination in deer, just nothing in literature. So I entirely relied on Ruben and his graduate students to proceed. So that was kind of rewarding. Well, we shift to another country. This is the second part of the book. And here was a man called Tim Wallace, who was a deer farming pioneer extraordinaire. And he wanted to import elk because there were a lot of other deer farms by then in New Zealand, a lot. And his veterinarian approached us at home because he'd heard about the work I'd been doing and asked if I could get a whole bunch of elk. So I collected 18, offering money around. We quarantined them at home, and then we loaded them onto a DC-8 stretch, this plane, and it was an extraordinary event because, as Dave referred to, there were other species. There were standardbreds, thoroughbreds, Holsteins, Jerseys, Highland cows, the lovely, the big horns, beautiful creatures. There was a pig breed I'd never heard of. There were tiny ponies until the lady in charge of them smartened me right up and said, no, they're miniature horses. They're about 3 foot tall. I guess they market better. And then the elk. And that was an interesting situation because the grooms of the horses got the first class seats at the front, of course. And we, the rest of us, the pig carriers and the elk carriers, and we managed to wangle Joe to get on the flight by doing some shenanigans late at night. We had no seats. We were just at the back in a big kind of open area, about half the size of this room. And there were seats from a car wrecker's yard stacked against one wall. They're probably old Naugahyde seats, the springs at least weren't showing through, and we could move them. We moved them anywhere we liked in the back of the plane. The safety belts didn't work, but it didn't matter because we'd all go together when we go. Tom Lero, of course. And the food was in those glass ovens that you see in some stores, and the drinks were in a cooler with some ice. And we just sat, did our thing, moved the seat when we felt to, fell asleep. It was a monstrous journey. And eventually we showed up in New Zealand with these elk, which Tim Wallace was delighted with. Because there's a back history. Red deer were moved from Scotland and England and other European countries in the 1850s and devastated the environment. There were no predators, nothing to stop them eating, so they ate everything in sight. Massive damage. They made 3 grass species went extinct. They destroyed everything in sight. And by 1950, they were declared a pest. And they opened up to killing, to culling. And something like 3 million deer were shot from helicopters and turned into the meat industry. And the government built roads and huts and all sorts of access because they were just shambles, destroying everything in sight. And then eventually people began to realize there was an opportunity for farming. And so they went from darting to bulldogging, and that's a hell of a story on its own, to net guns, which became the method of choice. And Tim actually was such a sharp businessman, he sold at least 7,000 deer to other deer farmers, which was pretty shrewd going on his part. He owned 48 helicopters when we arrived, so he wasn't exactly a pauper. Well, there were some deer farms in New Zealand that we saw. And it was, in 1971, there was only one registered deer farm. In 1980, there were 1,540 in 9 years. Incredible. In 2005, there were 1.7 million deer on farms in New Zealand. It became a major industry, and it still is. Look, the numbers are down a bit, but what has happened in North America is intriguing, because there are now 10,000 deer farms in North America, in Canada and the US. Pennsylvania and Texas have 1,000 deer farms each, not just elk, but elk, red deer, and white-tailed deer. They've become a very important part of industry, a lot of it for the venison industry, of course, and also to keep the hunters happy. And domestication has become absolutely standard. This is a photograph taken in New Zealand of some red deer walking up a road. No dogs, no harassment, no fence, no nothing, just a guy walking behind and pushing up to the next paddock. So the completely domesticated animal, they reckon that the late, for 5,000 years, and then suddenly, only 50 years ago, became a new domesticated animal. The elk we had taken 5 years later had done really well. There they were, domestic elk on Tim's farm. And there we were. So we had seen so much deer farming in New Zealand, we decided to come back to Canada and start our own deer farm. And we acquired this bull elk and a few others, and eventually ended up with a nice herd elk of our own. And when it turned into business, and everything went very smoothly. But a couple of things occurred that would be fun to tell you about. One was the arrival of twins one year, which is a very rare event. And if you look closely, it's rather fuzzy up on the screen, but the little one, there's no way he's going to reach his mother's ever, not a hope. So we quickly took him off up into the handing yards, which we now had quite sophisticated yards, and started to bottle feed him over the weekend. But every 4 hours for two people working, there was a doctor, I was a vet, it was a bit tough. So luckily we had a neighbor who had some goats, another client of mine. So Mrs. Wilson promptly said yes, and half an hour later I was up at her farm, picked up 4 goats, and we brought the goats into the yards. And Twiggy, that we call the elk, because she had no curves, you remember the model of that name, and Twiggy lived with us for a long, long time, and she didn't need to be shown where the goat was. She knew where the milk source was. She ran over there as soon as she saw honey. And for 3 months, 4 goats fed honey, fed Twiggy, to the point where she was so much taller than the goats, she had to bend way down and then put her head up. Away she went. She grew like a weed. It was fantastic. So that was a great success. She went on to have her own calves, and that was super. The other little bit of drama was this one. One day in the winter, we came out and there was a big ball of ice on the face of this cow. Now you can see what the net result was, but we didn't know. So we went back to the house and got the hairdryer from the bathroom. We had power down at the yards, and here they were. Well, that was obviously very painful, so I had to sedate her. A pair of pliers was a surgical instrument, and away we went, and she did fine. We had other porcupine encounters, but this was the most dramatic one. And we did have this one cow called Missy. She came to us as a tame animal and completely domesticated. She loved a back scratch. Here I'm showing her off to a visitor from Argentina. And the point about this is you can see Missy's just lapping it. Her eyes are half closed in some ecstasy. But the cow next to her is interesting because she was not bottle raised. She was just one of the herd. And she accepted it. She was slightly concerned, but she hasn't gone for my leg there on the feed trough. And Missy was a key part of the farm for a long, long time. Beautiful animal. Visitors loved her. And she would come and try and grab snacks out of your pocket. I mean, she was that tame. So that's kind of the end of the story. There were Joe and I feeding the elk on the elk farm for all those years. And we quit after 21 years when we got to the age that some people here will recognize when things that used to take half an hour now take an hour and a half. And we thought we'd had enough by then. So thank you. So, grab this chair. Oh yeah, we need the microphone. Turn that one off. Just go and do that. We don't need it. Huh. Didn't happen. Ah. Good.
This is a Q&A time at the Old Corral. So I'm hoping you have questions for the wildest of wildlife vets you'll ever meet in your life.
Don't hurt yourself again.
I have a question, but I don't want to dominate the room or anything like that.
Spencer.
In the early 80s, I was traveling through Southeast Asia and we ended up in New Caledonia, and my wife's relative there was a big game hunter throughout the world, and he worked in the nickel industry, but that wasn't doing too well. So they turned most of New Caledonia into this wild red deer farm. Like they had these red deer there from New Zealand.
Yeah.
They came from New Zealand and they did really well there. They became trophies, and these Americans would pay outrageous amounts of money to go there and hunt these things. So, I mean, were you familiar with any of that kind of thing where they were moving them now from New Zealand to some other place? Right?
There are 18 countries that have deer farms in the world, and New Caledonia very much one of them. The introduction of the elk crossbreeding, they breed freely with red deer, increased the size of those antlers. So I bet there were some of those deer you're talking about New Caledonia were offspring of crossbreds, which has become important. And you're right, the Americans and the Russians paid serious money. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars for an opportunity. It's a big deal in New Zealand, the hunting industry. Yeah. Big deal.
I can bring this microphone to anyone else in the audience who might have questions.
Jerry, did your elk, did you use antlers to send to China and stuff like that?
Yeah, it became a big deal, the antler, velvet antler industry. We did some research on it. Claire, it's interesting because then this CWD, chronic wasting disease, hit the industry. It was first detected in 1981 in Wyoming, but gradually moved on to deer farms, transmitted through the wild, and it shut down the velvet industry like that, almost overnight. But the New Zealanders still run it. It's an important part of their industry. And of course, the Chinese still use antler velvet, but from a different deer species entirely, the sika deer. Oh. So you've got elk, red deer, and sika deer, and they're very closely related. And the sika deer is the big deal in China.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere way back there. Oh, hello, Dee.
So like a lot of animal lovers and readers, I grew up reading James Herriot, right? Yes. So I'm wondering, what's the plan? Are we going to see some of the Jerry Haigh stories brought to television or made into movies for our kids and our grandchildren to enjoy?
Well, thank you for an interesting question. First of all, the publishers from LA have decided that they have persuaded Netflix to make a biopic. Well, we're still working on the script. They're doing the advertising stuff and what have you, so that might come to something. And then a really intriguing thing, which is very minor, but I got this strange email from the National Geographic people. I had no idea what it was about. The guy said, could I speak to him? They were interested in some movie footage that I had. And they are making a story about the extinction of the northern white rhinoceros. And they were trying to find some footage of how people captured rhino in the 1970s, the late 60s, early 70s. And they must have done some digging online, because there on one of my webpage movie things, lo and behold, I've shot some Super 8 movie, which we then digitized. And there it is, and how I captured rhino in 1969, 70, 71, 72. So apparently they're going to run it in this movie. And all I have not yet been able to find out is whether it's going to buy me a decent dinner at McNally Robinson, a 5-star hotel for 2 nights, or a month in Tahiti in a 5-star resort. Something, hopefully. I haven't heard back. Rather bizarre that they would find a thing like that online, but there you are. I didn't tell them that Disney actually shot a movie of me doing rhino capture. I didn't think they needed to know that, because I would like the money. The hell with Disney.
Yeah,
I have a question. Oh, there's a question back there. Ferocious.
Yeah, Dave. Yeah.
So, Jerry, when you closed your ranch, what did you do with the animals?
Well, that CWD was part of it. By then, we had already gotten heavily into the venison industry, which was a good industry to be in. People were buying venison. There's quite a funny story about that, because as I told you, Jo's a doctor. She used to go out twice a week to Delisle, to the clinic there for the community clinic, and she took a carcass, had a carcass shipped to Delisle, to the butcher there. And he said to Jo, it's the first time I've ever seen an elk carcass with green government stamps on it. And he made soup of venison, sausages, all sorts of stuff. And that was good for him and good for us. And the last few that we got out of, we did sell at a knockdown price, but we were lucky. We sold them all and we had none left over. But that was, we quit farming in, when was that, Jo? 7? Or was that, no, that's when we moved. We quit a bit before that.
I have a question. Jerry, I used to see on Highway 55 heading east, lots of elk farms and a certain kind of, maybe it was Sika D farms and deer farms, that is. I don't see them anymore. Is that something to do with disease?
Is that loss of deer farms? Absolutely. The CWD situation put a lot of people in serious financial loss because they were expensive at that time. And so now what you have really basically are some people producing venison, but not very many. A lot of people producing superior sized antler stags and shipping into the hunting ranch market down in the States, or actually hunting ranch here. So those are the markets, and there's I don't think anybody's collecting semen or anything like that anymore.
Oh, so the animals that are hunted, the animals being hunted are not set in free in the wild. They're enclosed.
Absolutely, they're in hunt ranches. Hunt ranch in the States is a big deal. Again, you pay a lot of money. We learned something kind of interesting about the hunt ranch industry in the States, because if you pay thousands of dollars that you're going to pay for get a stag with a certain score on his antler size, the guide will take you out and not find it for 2 days. But he knows where it is, but he goes somewhere else. And then he knows he's got one that scores 387 or whatever it is you want to score. So the third day, the last day on the ranch, lo and behold, he goes to a different part of the ranch. And what's there? Bingo. It's a money industry. Yeah, it's a big deal. A lot of money changes hands, tens of thousands of dollars. One of my friends from Alexandria down in near Minneapolis, he sold a bull elk for $50,000 to a hunt rancher. When I say a lot of money, that's, so what the client paid, I have no idea, but he got 50K US dollars. A lot of money.
Do we have any other audience questions?
We have a little country place 45 minutes out of town. And when driving along the road, if a fox cuts to the edge of the road and sees the car, it immediately turns away from you and heads off. If a deer comes to the edge of the road, I have no way of predicting which direction they're going to take. And you'll find one jumps out, then suddenly 2, 3 will follow, and they go straight across the road in front of the car or into the car. We're one of the few people living out there who haven't had a deer incident what the hell is going on in the deer's brain?
Well, that's an answer I can't supply for you, but you're quite right. If you see a deer crossing the road in front of you, slow down, because there's likely to be a couple more behind it. And yeah, they don't do a lot. I'm coming back from hunting down Shonavan Way one time. A deer that was standing there doing nothing much decided to jump out in front of the truck that's closest Spencer and me here. I hadn't even reached the top gear. I was just past the 50 km/h sign, just coming out of Kyle. Boom. He was dead in the ditch, and the truck didn't look too good.
They're suicidal.
Yeah, that's what way of putting it. I don't know why. It was a pity. It was a nice looking deer, but not going to be edible.
Other questions here?
Another question, are there restaurants in Saskatoon who put venison on the menu?
Ah, friends of ours did have an elk meal a year or two back, but I don't know where. There might be. I do not know. Sorry, can't help. Does anybody else know if there's a restaurant where you can get elk or deer on the menu? I know they exist, but I don't know where they are.
Would Wapiti have it?
Oh, they might have, mightn't they? Yeah, bison, of course, out there. Yeah, but I don't know. Good question.
I have another question about, I'm here.
Ah.
When we were talking about the deer jumping out on the road, and many of us who've lived in the country, of course, have deer scars on our vehicles. But you know, we have a lot of antelope, and we're out by the Rosetown area. Very rarely do you ever hit an antelope. That's always been a quandary to me. Why?
Well, you're quite right. I haven't seen one. Of course, there are far fewer of them. That may be part of it. The number of antelope are nothing like the number of deer, whitetail especially.
I suppose that's true, but they are, like, I suppose it would be up to 60 to 100 deer or antelope that gather in the fall.
Yes, in herds.
Number 4.
Yes.
West of number 4.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. You're quite right. Yeah, we live in the country too. And actually, I just posted on my Facebook page and on Instagram, we had a white-tailed doe and her 2 fawns born on the lawn. And the little one, I took a video of it, and the little one fell down twice before it reached its mum. So they were very new. And that's right on my Facebook page. There it is, a little video. Cute. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it all right to eat CWD deer meat?
They recommend that you don't. I certainly can't tell you to. However, there is no scientific evidence that CWD has crossed into humans at all. And I'm a hunter. We haven't bought meat anywhere for over 40 years. It all comes to the end of a gun and fishing rod. Except bacon, I'm sorry.
Any other audience questions here?
Well,
okay. Dave, did you have a few
Oh, there's another one back there.
Why not ask? So when you went to Calgary to the zoo, what drug did you use?
Product called M99.
Okay.
You've met M99, have you? Yes. You're a veterinarian then? Okay. Yeah, it's the dose required for a rhino will kill 500 people. So it's in the same league as not fentanyl, it's way stronger than fentanyl, like 1,000 times stronger. And it's probably stronger than this new nasty one that's just been on the news in the last week or so, this horrific looking thing. And I actually used carfentanil, which is 1,000 times stronger than fentanyl. I used that on moose, several other species. And again, didn't self-inject because otherwise we might not be here together.
How do they respond to how is xylazine?
Oh, sevens
from a cow to the deer? Is it?
Yeah, well, I don't use it on its own. Well, I haven't practiced for years, but
do they react like cows?
Yeah, it's a great mixture. The M99 and the xylazine. Xylazine's a cattle sedative that's quite popular. Rompin is its trade name. And I've used a lot of it over the years, a lot of it in cattle. And as you suggest, it was a great thing on its own in cattle, but doesn't work very well on its own in these exotic species. But definitely I added it to all kinds of mixtures, very definitely. So where do you practice?
CFIA now.
Uh-oh.
I take care of a lot of CWD now. I was an equine practitioner, so now I'm a whatever practitioner when they call. It's like, well, look this up.
Okay, well, good for you. Yeah, yeah.
Jerry, you mentioned that the red deer and elk will interbreed.
Yes.
And I know my wife and I encountered red elk herds in Britain in the Lake District, bugling like elk. It was quite familiar. Is the fact that they are now separate species, is it just geographical coincidence?
I don't really know, but you're quite right. It's quite recent that they've finally decided there's a sufficient difference in the DNA to make them two different species, which is why I said 41 species. Because it used to be thought that there were only 40 species of deer. But when they sorted out the DNA between red deer and elk, it became 41. And you're right, the elk is the new species. So it's Cervus canadensis, where the red deer is Cervus scoticus, Scottish. And there they are, the two differences. And I don't know about the bugling. Certainly they're a different sound, because a red deer roar, there's no relationship to an elk bugle, none at all. They're totally different sound. As I wrote in here, the sound to me, when I first heard that first bull elk in the fall, I thought it was a soul in torment or some, those of you who have heard an elk bugle will know what I mean. It's just something else. Claire and Leslie would know, because they have a strong relationship with the zoo over many years. I mean, like when I started, you were involved with the deer in those days. And that's longer ago than we ought to admit. Well, Claire just said 50, so I'm allowed to repeat that.
Yes. Zoo Society formed in 73. So.
Was that it? Yeah. Okay, because I arrived in 75. That's right.
Good. I was just going to say, I live right across the river from the zoo, and if the wind is blowing in the right direction, I can hear the elk bugling.
Yeah, it's
carries that far.
It's quite a sound, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have a question on anesthetizing big animals like that. I remember in the days at the zoo, there were problems with them recycling the anesthesia and collapsing again.
Yeah.
Is there something that counteracted that has been discovered?
Well, naloxone is what's given to humans these days in this ghastly fentanyl thing. It's very short acting. And so I quickly switched to a better one that came on the market. And so the recycling problem disappeared. But for some reason, and I do not know why, human first responders have not been given this naltrexone, which actually lasts way longer than naloxone. Naloxone is what's called a one-pass drug. Goes into the bloodstream, metabolized in the liver, and that's it, it's done. Naltrexone has a metabolite that is still active, so it'll last for a lot longer. And people are now using that routinely in Southern Africa.
Further questions?
Spencer.
Since you're talking about drugs, I had a friend who was a vet from Sri Lanka, and he agreed to come and fix my cats.
Oh, yes.
I had sort of semi-feral cats.
Slightly different size than what I was used to. Go on.
Yeah, well, anyway, he said he'd come and he had some drugs.
Yeah.
So he comes out with these drugs he brought from Sri Lanka, and he gave this cat a dose that he said it would knock an elephant down. And it hardly touched this cat. The cat was wandering around and wobbling about, my question is, what kind of thing is going on there where you can knock an elephant or some big animal out with a drug and it doesn't even bother other animals?
There are species differences, no question about it. No question. One of the things, again, I refer to in here is my finding out that the dose for a white-tailed deer was the same dose as for a white rhinoceros to knock it out.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think rhinos are not overly reputed to be highly intelligent. And it may be something to do with the brain receptors for the drugs. There aren't very many of them in a rhino compared to a white-tailed deer. I don't know. I can't give you a good answer.
Yeah,
Any final questions here?
What do you and Joe doing to celebrate, Jerry?
Celebrate what?
You and Joe,
Well, why not?
what are you gonna do?
Oh, I don't know.
Something that takes an hour and a half?
We'll see. I'm starting to learn a new book about fishing. So there's some fishing stories there. The intermittent fisherman. I've fished in many countries for different species of fish. And this man has the same addiction as me. The fishing rod is,
Guilty as charged.
we can't help ourselves, can we?
No.
Right, you're both next.
Do I need that? What happened? Oh,
Just so that you. Never mind. Okay, that didn't work as well as I hoped it would.
anyway.
All the way over here. Any other questions here, or David, did you have any other questions you wanted to ask?
Probably quite a few. Well, I'll just say, I'll just ask if there's anybody in the audience that has any questions.
No, we might be done there. All right, it's all you, Dave.
I had a question at the tip of my tongue, but my brain goes on alternating currents. The question's out there somewhere. It won't come back for a while. Laugh now when you're older than I am.
Some of us are old enough to remember what a Rolodex is. And I think what happens with those sorts of things at my age is the Rolodex is stuck here, and about halfway home, it'll come to the front and I'll say, oh shit, I should have said that. But I haven't a clue what it was even. And there are several of us in the room who know what I'm talking about. So,
Signing.
well, thanks, guys. Lovely to see you. Thanks for coming.
Back over there. All right, thank you so much for coming, everyone. Jerry will be here to sign some books. I'm just going to move this stuff out of the way, though, so if you want to wait for 1 minute before you all run to the desk to get a signed copy. And yes, please remember you can get a book signed beforehand, and then you can just purchase it at the cash desk in the main area. All right, thank you to Dave and Jerry for this wonderful event tonight. Thank you all for coming out, and have a great evening.